Okay, so before we get started with our notes today, make sure one that you have paper out and a pencil or a pen. You do need to take notes as you watch this video since you will need this information for your task today. Also, recognize that on this Edpuzzle, you will be asked questions. You will be graded on how correct your answers are. Okay, so that means you cannot just write whatever you think you can't just write whatever just to keep moving on in the movie or in the video. You have to try to get the correct answer. Okay, this is a work habits grade. So, federal courts, what type of court cases do the federal courts hear? That is the question we want to answer at the end of the day. Before we get into this, though, let's review the judicial branch. Go back to your notes from last week and list what powers does the judicial branch have. Hint, it's not very many. Second, what checks does the judicial branch have over the other branches? Also hint, there's not that many. Okay, so the judicial branch, it is made up of courts, which makes sense. I mean, if you've heard anything about the judicial branch in the United States, you hear about like Supreme Court justices, which are judges. Justice and judge are kind of the same. And they have two main jobs, right? The judicial branch has two main jobs. They try to ensure that laws are fairly enforced, right? That everyone is treated equally under the law as outlined in the Constitution. If you watch the news at all or read the news at all from the United States, you know that this is not always true, but it is one of their jobs is to try to make sure this is true. We will learn that even though that this is their job, sometimes judges have been the ones who are not fairly enforcing the law. Okay, there's a lot of examples where judges do not uphold the law. Their second main job is to interpret laws, right? They decide what the laws mean, okay? They decide what the laws mean. There are two types of cases that federal courts will hear, and just really courts in general, not even just federal courts. But one type are criminal cases, and so this is when someone is accused of a crime and they will appear in court. This is, if you watch any sort of crime shows or law shows, this is usually what you are watching, are criminal cases. In criminal cases, you will have witnesses who go up to the stand and they give their testimony. And there's a jury, right, which is a group of peers from that area. There is, sorry, Mr. Markman just emailed me. There is a group of peers that, they're the ones who have to be convinced. And so remember, in the United States, everyone is innocent until proven guilty. And so what this means is that since everyone is innocent until proven guilty, the jury has to be convinced that this person either did the crime, right? They have to be convinced. And so that is led by a prosecutor who gathers evidence and witnesses to try to convince the jury that this person did commit the crime. And then there's the defendant, who's a lawyer who represents the person who's being accused. And they are trying to convince the jury that this person did not commit the crime. And so those are criminal cases. And we will learn that the federal court does hear some criminal cases. Another type of case are civil cases. And this is when one party believes their rights have been harmed. And so in this situation, each side will present its view in court. Judges will apply the law to the facts presented, and then they'll decide who's right. There's a few different types of civil disputes. So it could be between two private parties, so an individual and another individual, or an individual and a business. There's a lot of different types. And then also between a private party and the government, so a business against the government, individual against the government. There's also civil disputes between governments, so between different state governments, or between a state government and the federal government, and so on and so forth. If you watch the introduction video, you know this, but the United States is a dual court system. Okay, that means each state, so Washington, Oregon, California, Missouri, each state has their own court system and they have their own laws. Okay, and then there's the federal court, which represents the entire United States. Okay, and there's a court system for the entire federal, or the federal court system represents the entire nation. The federal court, which represents the entire nation, is separate from the individual state courts. This ensures that states have power. Let's see. States courts get their power from the individual state constitution. So Tennessee has its own Tennessee Constitution. Federal courts, of course, get their power from the US Constitution. Federal laws trump state laws, meaning federal laws are above state laws. It's a little complicated, but yeah. So now this is where we're going to start answering this question. Federal court jurisdiction. Jurisdiction is this word, the authority to hear and decide cases. So federal courts can only hear certain types of cases, and this protects state laws. It creates this balance between the national government and the state governments. But this is our question, right? What kind of court cases does the federal courts hear? So what is their jurisdiction? What kinds of cases can or does the federal court have the power to hear? So here they are. There's 5 of them. Okay, so they will hear they will hear cases that pertain to the US Constitution. So if there's like something about freedom of speech and someone believes the federal government has taken away their freedom of speech, federal courts will hear that case. And then the Constitution, or the law has decided that there are some crimes that need to be here under from the federal court. So they're called federal crimes, which are a big deal. Okay, so kidnapping is a federal crime, tax evasion, counterfeiting, terrorism. I don't know if they decided on this, but for a while they were going to try hate crimes as a federal crime. So just when people harm someone out of hate, just making that a bigger deal by charging it as a federal crime. I don't know if they decided that. Someone look it up. Another kind of case that they'll hear will be conflicts between states or parties from different states. So if I feel like someone in Nevada has wronged me, that would be tried in a federal court because we're from different states. Or if states themselves have conflicts. So if California has a conflict with Colorado, that would be tried in a federal court. Oh my goodness, I don't know how to say this word. I'm sorry, I should have looked it up. But maritime laws, so things in the ocean, are tried in federal courts. And this makes sense, right? Who does the ocean belong to? We don't know. And so any type of crime that might take place in the ocean, or if there's like a sunken ship and 2 different people are claiming that they own that ship, that would go to a federal court. The 4th kind are cases that include the federal government. So if someone is suing the national government, suing the president, suing the legislative branch or whatever, that would be heard in the federal courts. And then finally, cases with foreign governments and US diplomats are heard in federal courts. So with really not even just foreign governments, but anyone from other countries, if they have a case in the United States, that would be heard in a federal court instead of a state court. However, so these are the court cases that federal courts would hear, right? This is their jurisdiction. However, there are some, not differences. There's two types of jurisdiction, right? Exclusive jurisdiction is the federal law is broken, that case goes to federal court, period. State law is broken, case goes to state court, period. Any of those 5 things that we just talked about, that goes to federal court. However, sometimes there is this concurrent jurisdiction. So if a state and federal law are broken at the same time, they could be heard in either court or both courts. Okay? So the accusing party, so the person who is making the accusation, gets to decide. So if their case broke both federal and state law, the accusing party can decide to take the party to whatever court. Usually they'll decide on the one that has the worst consequence. However, the accused party can insist to be heard in the federal court if they want. So if the accusing party decides, hey, I want a state court, the accused party can insist on being heard in the federal court. Sometimes, depending on how many laws were broken in one crime, they could be heard in both. Okay, and that's it. So you have a task on Google Classroom. It's a Google form. You will read some headlines, and then you will try to decide, will this be heard in a federal court or will this be heard in the state court, and how do you know?